Good morning and welcome to UUCC, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua. This book is a new thing for me, so we're going to figure it out. We are a group of spiritual freethinkers who gather to celebrate life, build community, and better the world. Wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. I'm Karen Alvarez, your worship associate for this morning, and the service today is being led by our minister, Eileen Casey Campbell. The service is also being live streamed to our YouTube channel. We will plan on continuing with hybrid worship throughout the church year, so you can join us each week here in person, or on Zoom, or later on YouTube if you prefer. If this is your first visit, welcome. We invite you to sign the visitor's book in the entryway, and whether it's your first visit or your 1,000th, we're glad you came. I have a few announcements to share with you today. RE and Child Care will be provided this morning by Nancy Reed. If you have joys and sorrows to share this morning, please fill out a card and place it in the basket on the welcome table in the back. If you missed the table when you came in this morning, it's a new thing. You can just go back, fill something out, put it in the basket, and we'll be ready to pick it up before the first hymn. We have a new system for people to volunteer to help on Sunday mornings. Also, at the table where the joys and sorrows are, there's a magnetic board with roles that need filling, volunteer roles for the morning. If you see an available task that you know you could help with, like being an usher to collect the offering, or making coffee, pull the task off the board and place it in the basket below. The tasks with green are good ones for children to help with. There's also a sheet to sign up in advance for Sunday worship roles on the table, like this role or RE, a couple other ones. So you can stop by and sign up for that as well. Donation drive for asylum seekers is happening this month. Bring your donations to the church lobby and Dorothy will arrange delivery. Contact Dorothy at dorothy.hoskins@gmail.com for information and to let her know if you're dropping something off. You can find more details on what to donate in the flyer at the back of the church or in the weekly email. Are there any other announcements for the good of the community? Alrighty. As we prepare to be fully together, I remind you to silence your phones and other devices. We now enter a space of worship. Elliot. He was so excited this morning. I invite you to join with me in our chalice lighting words as the flame is lit. Okay, ready? We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we shared together. Good job.
Friends, the wheel of the seasons has turned to fall. And as Oren makes his way up, are you here, Oren? We don't know where Oren went. Is there someone who'd like to turn the seasons wheel? Maybe someone, okay, let's have Elliot. Would you please turn in your hymnals to number 73 so that we can sing verse 1 for the celebration of fall? On the welcome table, and they ask what's on your heart this morning, and there are a couple of little check boxes we have for people. We ask people if they want their joy or their sorrow to be shared out loud with their name, or to be shared out loud anonymously, and at the bottom there's a little checkbox that almost no one ever checks that says, do you want to talk with a minister about this? And I'm happy in my heart that almost no one ever checks it, because it means that your sorrows are not too heavy to hold in community. But once in a while, folks check it because they need a little bit more support. And this is the way they know how to find it. And once, when we first started doing our joys and sorrows this way, I got a joy that was from a little girl in the congregation, about 7 years old. And she'd written her name on the front, and then written her sorrow. It was not a joy, it was a sorrow. That she was so sad at the ending of summer. And she checked the little box at the bottom, yes, I want to talk with a minister about this. So, after the service, I went and found her towards the back corner, and I sat down on the floor so I could be at her eye level, and I said, do you want to talk about your sorrow? And then she sat down on the floor, like, this is what we do. This is a formal proceeding, and we're going to sit here in the middle of the sanctuary and talk about my sorrow. And so we did sit there in the middle of the sanctuary, talk about her sorrow. And she told me all the big feelings she was having about how the sunny days and warm weather and swimming in the afternoon was going to be over soon. And every time a leaf falls, it made her feel sad that her favorite season of summer was really, really over. So we sat together with her grief and held it together for a little bit. And then she wasn't all better, but she felt like she could move on. And so we moved on. And my friends, I think sometimes, most of the times, this is why we come to church. Because here we can bring our biggest feelings, even if they don't seem like they should be big to others. If they feel big to us, we bring them here to share with one another. Here we know that we can be vulnerable with our deepest selves, and not just our joyful selves, but our sorrowful selves too. And this is a space we are creating together where we help one another move through the seasons of life, through the cycles of time, even when it's difficult. We say to one another, we are with you. So this morning, I am so glad to be with you. I would ask, as we begin our service, would you rise in body or in spirit, here or at home, and join together in singing our first hymn, I'm Worthless Without Bill, so I've written none of the hymns. Circle Round for Freedom 155. Thank you, Scott. Now is the time to bring our joys and sorrows forward. And Rory, I think, is going to carry our joys and sorrows to the front. Right, Rory? Way to support your friends. Oh, Rory and Ewan are going to bring our joys and sorrows forward. And friends, it's time for a story. If you're a small person or even a big person and you want to hear the story up closer, feel free to come and sit up in front. If you're comfortable where you are, you can stay where you are. coming forward, I will use this time to tell you that this story is adapted from one by the Reverend Erica Hewitt, a UU minister, called Strong is What We Make Each Other. And I could use a little help to tell the story. So I'm gonna look for someone who maybe hasn't had a chance to be a helper this morning. And if there are no willing people, then maybe we'll have someone who's already had a chance. But I need someone to be a hare. Is anybody feeling like a hare? Especially if you haven't had a job this morning. Do you feel like a hare, maybe a wise rabbit? Yes, come up, or you missed your job. And I also need someone who feels a little bit like a jealous monkey. Is there anybody who feels like a jealous monkey who hasn't had a job yet?
I love monkeys.
Okay. Ellie, I think you might be the perfect monkey. Come be our jealous monkey right here. Okay, can you stand right in front of the pulpit for me? Right here. There we go. Thank you, monkey. This story starts like this. Long ago, before our grandmothers were born, before even their grandmothers were born, before any humans lived, the animals made their homes. The animals made their homes all around the forest. There wasn't much design to it. Huts were just scattered this way and that. They had small little huts made of sticks or mud, but none of them minded very much. And Hare lived in one of these small huts near the edge of the forest. And Monkey lived there also, right next door. Here's your hut, Monkey. Hare was happy and comfortable with his little home. It gave him a cozy place to rest. Monkey's hut was the same as Hare's and all the other animals, but Monkey was not happy. She longed for a bigger and a better hut, better than everyone else's. She decided to build a better one. You ready to build, Monkey? So she went off to the edge of the stream and set out to build the best hut in the forest. All along, we're just going to pretend. We'll just pretend. Use your imagination. All along, she checked on the other animals' homes to make sure hers was looking better and fancier. And it was. Monkey finished, and, ready, Monkey? Immediately ran to Hare to boast about her new hut. My home is the grandest in all the forest, she bragged. Probably in the whole world, just like that, but without touching. You could never build a home as great as mine. I could, said Hare, and he hopped off. Monkey sat and wondered where Hare had hopped off to. He was gone a long time. Eventually, jealous Monkey decided to spy on him. Can you be very sneaky, Monkey? When she came to the center of the forest, she saw that Hare was not building a new hut. He was hopping from hut to hut. Can you hop from hut to hut, Hare? He was hopping from hut to hut, calling all the other animals to come with him. And they were. They followed him to the center of the forest. Here we are in the center of the forest. And Monkey snuck along behind. After some discussion and some drawing out of plans in the dirt, the animals all started building. They all built new huts in a great large circle, all facing each other in the center. And as they finished, Monkey saw from her hiding place that all the huts were the same size as the original homes. Just as simple, just the same. Too curious to keep quiet, Monkey jumped out from her hiding spot. We're going to use our imaginations for Monkey. And she said, "Why have you built these small, simple homes? They aren't better. They're not better than mine, and they're not better than your first homes." The animals looked confused at Monkey's failure to understand. "They're better because we're together now," Hare explained. "We'll go to sleep and we'll wake up knowing that all the others are nearby. We'll peek out our heads to say good morning and would you like this extra berry that I have, or could you help me move this large stick that has fallen? And dear Monkey, what could be grander?" Monkey understood, suddenly felt regret over her large fancy house. "We left a spot for you," Hare said, "if you'd like to build a small hut here with us." And Monkey did. And this is the end of our story. Thank you for helping me tell it.
Now is the time in our service to join together in the spiritual practice of generosity. Our gifts of both time and money support our church in its work. Each week, we would like to spotlight a group or committee and thank them for their gifts of time. This week, the group is hospitality. So if you are enjoying things like socializing after service and would like to bring some snacks to facilitate that, there's a calendar on the refrigerator in the back, so you can just sign up for a week, or your Soul Matters group can sign up, whatever works, but that just seems to make people stick around a little bit longer and chat a little bit more. 1/4 of our collection plate for the harvest season goes to Friends of Ganondagan, who support this National Historic Landmark and the only New York State historic site dedicated to a Native American theme. The culture, art, agriculture, and government of the Seneca people influenced our modern understanding of equality, democratic government, women's rights, ecology, and natural foods. You can give to this morning's offering by placing cash or a check into the basket, or by one of the options on your screen. Please make a note that your gift is intended for today's offering. We now gratefully accept the offering. But it appears nobody took that task for today.
Now is the time to lift up all the big feelings that are on our hearts, and to remind ourselves that whatever joys or sorrows are on our hearts this morning, we always say to one another, "We are with you." Today we share in Maria's sorrow in missing her Toddy, her grandmother, this morning. We share in several joys for Pat Mells and her competition in disc golf this week, and wish her lots of luck. We share in gratitude for community, and we share in joy with Bob, who offers this joy. There once was a woman named Nancy, whose persona captured my fancy. I don't often get these in verse, so this is really great. 9/26 natal day nears. It's already been, it says mumble here, years. And many more we both see. Happy birthday, Nancy. For all these and the joys and sorrows left in the silence of our hearts, we say to one another, "We are with you. We are with you." And Karen and Elliot will drop one last stone. And now it is time for religious education. So if you would like to join Miss Nancy and Miss Kaya downstairs, you can head that way now. Let's take a moment to center ourselves for a period of meditation, followed by some shared silence. Let's get comfortable in our seats, whether here or at home. Maybe your feet find the firm foundation beneath them. Your shoulders relax away from your ears. Perhaps your eyes fall closed. We remind ourselves that by shared silence, we mean the absence of grown-ups talking to each other so that we can listen more closely to the sounds of life. The cars going by on the street outside, the birds singing in the trees, the breath of the neighbor beside us, the giggles of our children downstairs, the beating of our own hearts. Let us breathe deep and listen for these sounds of life. I share these words this morning from Oscar Romero. Salvation is not alienation. It is not going to heaven to think about eternal life and forget about the earth. It's a transcendence of the human heart. It is entering into the reality of a child, of the poor, of those wearing rags, of the sick, of a hovel, of a shack. It is going to share with them. And from the very heart of misery of this situation, to transcend it, to elevate it, to promote it, to say, you aren't trash. To say the exact opposite. You are valuable. So are we all. Amen. We had one of those weeks at our house where we didn't get much of a chance to talk about what I was planning to preach about this week, let alone a whole lot of other grown-up topics. But Brian, without knowing, happened to wear the very perfect t-shirt for this morning's service. It makes all the more sense now that you see he's buttoned up his flannel to cover it. But it says underneath there, I promise you, sometimes antisocial, always anti-fascist. It's hard to be a minister's spouse because you wind up in these public situations where you didn't sign up to be. When I was in school the first time around, I did my thesis on fascist political theory. It was during the second Bush administration, and it was hard not to see some similarities between the pre-fascist strategies of European states in the early 20th century and that administration. Before brown shirt fascism takes hold, the right-wing terrorism we associate with something like Kristallnacht. This period of what you could call white-collar proto-fascism takes place. There are fascist tactics utilized, but in a bureaucratic way. Everybody's hands stay clean. And we saw that building in the early 2000s, right? But I and my fellow classmates were really reluctant to draw those comparisons. I think now maybe we were just young and idealistic, hopeful for the triumph of the good, really just praying that we were wrong. Maybe we were in denial, just unwilling to believe the worst of our fellow citizens. I reacted with deep skepticism, I remember, when my advisor suggested that the camps, these extra-legal zones of death and detention for fascism's designated outgroups, were an inevitability of the path we were on. And then that memory, the memory of that skepticism, hit my gut like a ton of bricks when I started working on immigrant justice in Albany in 2017 and saw images and heard stories of immigrant detention centers where people, adults and children alike, who were not convicted or charged with a crime were held in deplorable conditions indefinitely, fully at the whim of the state. Still, somehow, in 2017, I think lots of us hoped that if democracy prevailed in removing Trump from office, we wouldn't have to worry about fascism. My friends, we do have to worry about fascism. It may be a little late to begin worrying about fascism. I have decided now, after altogether too many years of denial, to commit to naming political tactics as fascist when that's what they are. And I'll tell you, it raises a few eyebrows. For a long time, fascism was one of our society's few undisputed evils. And so you're definitely not supposed to call people fascist. It's sometimes too easy to let it be a stand-in for just anything we don't really like, and it feels kind of bad. And partly I think that's because fascist ideology is really hard to pin down. It is hard to define on purpose because that makes it harder to resist. One of the purposes of fascism is to unite some variety of ideologies under one big umbrella of control. To unite a variety of ideologies, or more importantly, a lack of coherent ideology under an umbrella of control. In truth, fascism shows up more as a methodology than an ideology. And we can pin that down. We can point out fascist tactics much more easily than we can any coherent system of fascist belief. And we should. We should begin doing that, if we haven't already. So let's begin by taking a moment more on this idea of fascism as a system of control that covers over an emptiness of belief. The Reverend Cecilia Kingman is a UU minister and a scholar of fascism, and she points out its utility in covering over and filling these holes created by our own moral injuries. She wrote the Berry Street essay for General Assembly this year, and she wrote this: "The belief in one's own special place, combined with the traumatic indoctrination into that belief, the immoral deal one must make to trade parts of oneself for a myth of superiority. This injury creates a psychological and moral framework that makes us vulnerable to fascist ideologies. So those of us with the spiritual emptiness created by participating in systems that have unjustly privileged us because of our whiteness, our straightness, our able bodies, our gender, our class, we find ourselves too susceptible to fascist tactics, especially when we don't know how to recognize them. Okay, so let's get to work on recognizing them, right? Jason Stanley, a Yale professor of philosophy, literally wrote the book on fascism. I recommend any of his books to you, but he has a primer on fascism that is a good read for people who are looking for these tactics. And he identifies 10 common tactics of fascism. They don't individually a fascist make, but patterns of them together pretty much always add up to a fascist methodology. So number 1, Stanley points out that fascist tactics will always include a mythic past. This signpost of fascism is the nostalgia for a time of past greatness that may or may not have existed in reality, and a longing for that greatness to be restored. It could take the form of a red hat with "Make America Great Again" written on it. It could also take the form of, "In my day, 150 years ago, we always sang this hymn at this time during the church service, and things were better back then." It nearly always harkens back to a period when the hierarchies fascism loves were more heavily enforced. The second tactic is propaganda. Now, power lies. Everybody does propaganda. But fascist propaganda will always set up a rhetoric of in-groups and out-groups. It signals to the in-group that they are special, and it cultivates fear regarding the out-groups. The third tactic is anti-intellectualism. Expertise is a threat to the fascist ideal of leadership through power alone. So as fascist methods take hold, we see attacks on education and educators, book bans, an increase in seemingly grassroots efforts to restrict access to information. And it's not just Florida, my friends. It is definitely Florida. But it's not just Florida. We've seen book bans proposed here in this school district. We have seen the very well-funded, not at all grassroots Moms for Liberty running candidates in local elections all across the Finger Lakes and upstate New York. Tactic number 4, Jason Stanley calls unreality. Freedom requires the practice of establishing a shared reality. And fascism does all it can to create a sense of chaos around truth. Conspiracy theories, misinformation campaigns, and stoking anxiety about conspiracy and misinformation campaigns are all part of this strategy. The goal being that no one can say with certainty what is real and true. We are not on the same page about truth. Number 5 is hierarchy. This is the center of the list and the beating heart of fascism. It is ultimately a methodology of power that relies on establishing a strict ranking of human worth, clear boundaries around who counts and who does not. And hierarchy in fascism is enforced by violence or the threat of violence. Unless we imagine that this is somebody else's problem in Tennessee or in Texas, it is a problem in Tennessee and in Texas, but it's our problem too. This kind of hierarchy enforced by terror showed up in Geneva last week when anti-Semitic threats of violence forced Temple Bethel to cancel their Rosh Hashanah services. Number 6 is a story of victimhood. We should maybe call it a story of perceived or false victimhood. It's a tactic that's made possible by the acceptance of hierarchy. So when society shifts toward equity and hierarchy is disturbed, the in-group or the top of the hierarchy experience that equality as victimhood. This is the Christians are so persecuted these days, or white guys can't catch a break anymore, that we hear from people who have lost just an ounce of their mountain of power and privilege. Tactic number 7 is law and order politics. Law and order here is in quotation marks, because this tactic shows up actually not as a protective system of justice, but as talk of law and order, established by enforcing hierarchy through violence and fear, and the exemption of power from the rule of law. If you have power, the law doesn't apply to you. If you're a designated outgroup, you will be kept subservient by violence. Number 8 is sexual control. So another way that fascist hierarchy is enforced is with rigid gender and sexuality norms. We see it as a cultural fear and anxiety around other people's gender expression and their sexual lives. Let's say bans on drag performance, restrictions on sexual health care like abortion, birth control, and HIV preventatives, as well as on gender-affirming health care, and a general culture of fear and violence toward any gender or sexuality that is outside of that hierarchy's control. Number 9, Stanley calls Sodom and Gomorrah, because fascist movements tend to emphasize an urban-rural divide, where try that in a small town, sets up a small town as a wholesome, hardworking, morally upright place, while cities, with all their diversity, represent depravity, sin, and laziness. We know this as a racist dog whistle in our context, but this divide, this urban-rural divide, was present even in fascist settings without the same racial implications as ours. And number 10, he writes right in the original German, Arbeit macht frei. Work will make you free, the translation is, the slogan written on the gates of Auschwitz. Fascist methodologies categorize leftists and dissenters as lazy, and their supposed laziness as theft from the system. Worth in a fascist hierarchy is deeply connected to work. And it's not a far leap, especially if we know our fascist history, to know what that means for the worth of people with disabilities. We're going to talk more about that next week. But we saw in the last few years how ready our own society has been to write off the needs of people with disabilities in order to establish a return to normal, meaning largely a return to work. So calling out these fascist tactics when we see them, even with this very detailed framework guiding us, still does raise some eyebrows. But I've preached so-called controversial social justice issues here before, and I think I know you well enough that I don't expect that from any of you. Anytime I've thought maybe my take on a matter of justice was too radical, the response it's garnered from you has been, okay, and what do we do about it? How do we make it right? And yes, there is a fight to be fought, and we will be in it. There is no end to the work we may be called to in resisting fascism, and we'll talk in more detail about it, honestly, all year. We'll talk about it on Sunday mornings, and better yet, we'll talk about it in our social and environmental justice meetings, where we focus our energies toward justice on third Thursdays. Please show up there to lend your hands to that work. But this morning, the what do we do about it? The work we're called to is a spiritual work. Before we can dive in to start dismantling these systems and fighting the good fight, the work that needs our attention, especially those of us who are holding a lot of power in the would-be fascist hierarchy, is a spiritual work. Your constant refrain of "what now?" in response to injustice lets me know we need more than an opposition to what we know is wrong. We need more than the power of no. We need a solid and spiritually grounded yes to guide our feet. And thanks to the universe, we have it. The yes behind our no to fascism is freedom. And because freedom is not yet realized, we call it liberation. We have that yes of liberation at the very foundations of our faith, and we have it woven in over the centuries since. Liberation theology, as a cohesive frame of thought, really began in Latin America in the mid-20th century, when Christian theologians rejected both of the commonly accepted European understandings of the meaning of salvation. Thanks to the work of James Cone, it quickly took hold in Black theology circles as well. The Catholics' theology of salvation had been one of participation. So individuals who participated materially in the church by way of behavior and ritual would find salvation after life. The common Protestant theology of salvation was one of will. Individuals who chose to accept God's grace would find salvation once again after life. Liberation theologians did two things. One, they insisted that salvation was of this world and this life, the kingdom of God on earth as promised in the form of liberation from oppression now. And two, they made the collective body of the oppressed and not the individual the location of salvation. So they shifted the time and they shifted the location. John Sobrino, a favorite liberation theologian of mine, rewrote the age-old European maxim, "There is no salvation outside of the church," to read, "There is no salvation outside of the poor," meaning anyone, oppressed or not, if they were interested in liberation from these systems of oppression, had to locate themselves with the oppressed. There was no salvation for any of us outside of that. Our universalist heritage tells us the same. We all go together if we go at all. There is no liberation for us, especially those of us who hold power and privilege in these systems of oppression, without liberation for everyone. And universalist liberation means that those of us with positions of power are called to orient ourselves toward a spiritual theology with the targets of oppression at its center. To view the oppression of others, even when it materially benefits us, as our own damnation. Because no hell for anyone doesn't just mean we refuse to damn anyone to torment in their death, but we refuse to damn anyone to torment in this life either. That our freedom is contingent on everyone else's. So it's time. It's time to do the spiritual work of living up to this understanding of freedom. To stop conflating freedom with power. To stop trading our opportunities for interdependence in for security in a system that will never save us. That little taste of power climbing up a rung in the hierarchy is a cheap imitation of freedom. Liberation for those of us with relative power and privilege is costly and hard. It will not look like finally getting to the top rung. It will look like letting go of the ladder altogether. And it will take courage of great followership, where we may have expected to be leaders. True liberation is costly. It will cost us the deposits we have put down on the false promises of hierarchy at the heart of fascism. And it is worth the cost. Because the fruit that liberation bears is our collective survival. It is a freedom that leaves no one behind. Let's remind ourselves once again of what Cecilia Kingman said. The belief in one's own special place, combined with the traumatic indoctrination into that belief, the immoral deal one must make to trade parts of oneself for a myth of superiority. This injury creates a framework that makes us vulnerable to fascist ideologies. Our spiritual work here is to unravel any beliefs we may have inherited of that hierarchy at the heart of fascism. Our work is to dig up and discard, deeply held commitments to our own superiority that were buried in us from our beginnings. We have got to stop living with hierarchy at the center, because that is what fascism wants. Our spiritual work is to heal the moral wounds we've inflicted on ourselves by participating in power structures that rely on the hierarchies of racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, ableism, and so much more. Now is the time to live into our faith that puts love at the center, to mean it when we speak the holy truth: no hell for anyone, even on earth. Our healed hearts will be strong enough to hold the yes of liberation in the face of whatever fascism brings. May it be so, and amen. I want to offer this benediction again from the Reverend Cecilia Kingman. It is easy to be frightened and overwhelmed in an upward cycle of fascism. There is hard work ahead, but there is also joy and friendship and healing on this side. Not after, but right here in the struggle. Be tenacious in your spiritual practices and your community care. Let us remember those who came before us and survived far worse than we can imagine. Let us remember we are held in the hands of a love that abides. Will you rise in body or in spirit to join me in our closing hymn, number 131 in the gray hymnal, 131, Love Will Guide Us.
Oh
please join me in our words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.